but we're going to get started today with our seminar. So thank you, Sean, and the panel for coming. So today we have Sean Ammirati. He is a partner at Birchmere Ventures, focused on both SaaS and digital marketplace investments. His investments include No Wait, acquired by Yelp, Humano, acquired by Dropbox, Altru, Healthy, Crystal, Jazz HR, Phone Wagon, Spider Tech, Legal Sifter, and The Zebra. He is also a distinguished service professor of entrepreneurship at Carnegie Mellon University's Tepper School of Business. In addition to teaching, Sean also is the co-founder and director of the Carnegie Mellon Corporate Startup Lab. The CSL is a Swartz Center initiative that has conducted research and developed tools to help companies better adapt and integrate entrepreneurial best practices into their own innovation processes. Sean completed his first book, The Science of Growth, in April of 2016, which was released by St. Martin's Press and was subsequently translated and published in Korean and Mandarin. So Sean, I'll let you get started.
Thanks, Allison. And I saw Matt was like trying really hard not to laugh through that introduction, because Matt remembers me as like the guy sharing a room with him at MSPOC. It sounds much more glamorous when Allison reads that on a bio. But I'm really excited about today's panel, guys. So I have this hypothesis, and we're going to jump pretty quickly into a conversation with the three panelists that we have today. But I have this hypothesis about entrepreneurship at Carnegie Mellon, which is that it's very, very easy to get focused on validation around certain external events, like raising a big venture round or selling your company or whatever. But that one of the biggest value creating events that a lot of startups are overlooking is that getting a partnership in place with a key corporate partner in their industry, whether that be a customer relationship or a strategic investment or a deeper channel partnership. And so I've been doing a bunch of these Swartz Connect workshops over the years, but pitched Allison, Sonia, and the team at Swartz about, hey, since we already have some folks from large companies working with us on the upcoming CSL project course capstones, why don't we have them come talk to all of you the same day that they're going to be on campus anyways for the kickoff. Now, as we all know, nobody's on campus right now, or at least we're not doing the kickoff on campus. It'll be over Zoom, but they're kind of joining us on Zoom for this, and then they'll be back tonight to talk to a team of student entrepreneurs who are working on corporate startups within their projects. But what we want to focus on today is the other side of it. So not corporate startups, but traditional startups partnering with large companies like Microsoft, Optum, and MSSA to accelerate their startups. And we have three great panelists to join us. I've worked with each of these folks in different capacities and each of their organizations in different capacities. And I think they have some great perspective to bring to this. As Allison said, our goal is to really talk about the things that you want to talk about. I can literally talk for the hour. I could ask these guys questions for the entire hour. But what I'm actually much more interested in is what are you hoping to hear from them around these topics. So I'll keep an eye on the chat and I'll start going through my questions until we get to a point where there's questions in the chat, and then we'll let the chat drive it. And if you want to also just raise your hand so that I can see, I'm happy to kind of just you can just jump off mute and ask the question directly as well. But one way or the other, let's try to make this as interactive as possible. While we're waiting for that, why don't I have the three panelists introduce themselves. So we've got two Matts on the panel. So we'll start with Matt Fleckenstein from Microsoft. Matt, if you want to introduce yourself quickly.
Hi, I'm Matt Fleckenstein. As Sean said, I've known Sean a long time. We did a startup together back in the day. I'm currently working at Microsoft, where I run product strategy and kind of the product group for our mixed reality initiatives at the company. So augmented reality, virtual reality, and everything kind of in that space. I also spent a significant amount of time doing some smaller startups, but also a couple of corporate startups within Salesforce. And I think you'll hear me talk a little bit about that when we get into kind of partnering, because I think they did some things really, really well that may be worth noting.
Awesome. All right, Paul, go ahead.
Hi, Sean. Thank you for having me. So Paul Nielsen, I've also known Sean for for quite a while in different capacities, where we both lived in Pittsburgh. Sean did evacuate and went south to Florida to the sunshine. but yeah, so my background, I'm with Optum Technology, and Optum is among the group of companies owned by United Healthcare Group. My focus is around corporate transformation and doing that by bringing in innovation from outside the company. My background is, before I came to Optum, I spent 25 years in startups, 6 of them, and I was in the telecommunications space, specifically digital video and audio delivery, both starting with ads and then going into on-demand content and what everybody now takes for granted, video on demand. I was with one of my startups that was the first company to launch that in 1997 with Time Warner Cable, and it grew into, that was my success. That was a bootstrap company and founded in 1993, in July 1993, and we went public November 1996 without receiving $1 outside money. So that was a fun ride, but I'm here to share those experiences with you, and then love to share my experience going from startups to a Fortune 6 company where we have 330,000 employees worldwide, and it's quite a different experience, and it brings challenges that you don't see in a startup, but that's why I'm here. Try to break through those challenges, and Sean is my partner in a lot of that.
Awesome, thanks, Paul. And then Matt from MSA.
Yeah, thanks, Sean. My name is Matt Quigley. I'm a product group manager with MSA. We're a manufacturer of safety products that is headquartered in Cranberry, Pennsylvania, so just 20 minutes north of the CMU campus. My focus is primarily on the fire service and integrating new technology products, both for our current embedded safety products that we have today, as well as commercializing a new cloud software platform that will support all of our products moving forward globally. I know Sean through our work with Safety.io, which is our software as a service subsidiary of MSA. And like the other panelists, really excited to share my experiences with you guys during this discussion.
Awesome. All right, so let's jump in. I know when I talk to student entrepreneurs, faculty entrepreneurs on campus, a lot of times they have a company in mind that they think would be helpful for them to connect with, but they can't quite figure out how to find the human at that company to actually connect with, right? So it's great to say, MSA or Optum or Microsoft would be a great partner for us, but that doesn't really mean anything if you can't find the right person in the organization to talk to. And so I thought a good place to start, and I'll open this up, any of you can jump in, but just when you're trying to find that executive sponsor for your startup, tips, tricks, things that you think entrepreneurs should be aware of there.
Yeah, Sean, I'll go ahead and get started on that one. I think one of the areas that we've seen a ton of success is just with outside partnerships, and specifically within the fire service would be our work with NIST and PSCR. So these are government-funded research and development groups that a lot of startups, a lot of campus research from the academic community is able to basically come together with different sponsors from the corporate world. And you'll often find that a lot of the people that are working within this are people that are actively within the industry that are looking for new trends and new opportunities to help build their business lines. So speaking from MSA's perspective, we've met a lot of interesting founders of startups through these opportunities for engaging in new projects, just making contacts. And we've actually engaged with several of them over the past 2 or 3 years. So I think when meeting the contacts, it's not just meeting the company directly. I think going to a lot of industry related R&D communities that really facilitate that connection making between the startup community as well as the larger corporations is a really good hotbed for making those connections.
So I'll jump in. So one of the things I've done to bring exposure to startups within our large corporation is I launched the Optum Startup Studio, which is based in Pittsburgh. It's actually in partnership with CSL. And it's a studio model for corporate incubator. and we run a cohort basically from September to end of April every year. 8 companies is our target. We have 5 today. And it fills a gap that as an enterprise, we have 3 venture capital groups. We have Optum Ventures, we have UHC Ventures, and we have UHG Ventures. They all have a different charter. Optum Ventures looks at technology companies, but really B-round companies, less risky, more mature companies, and UHC are looking for payers and brokers and things about plans. So that's really not focused on technology. And then UHG Ventures looks at the big deals. Like you just might have saw, we acquired a company called Change Healthcare. It's a $13 billion deal. And clearly that's adding a lot of top and bottom line numbers to the enterprise. But so in addition to the Optum Startup Studio, we partner specifically with Carnegie Mellon, where we sponsor a lot of capstones. There's a capstone within CSL, but also through other schools and colleges. And through that, we meet, the spirit at at CMU is around entrepreneurship. And we meet some very, very bright people, very talented. A lot of them, we look at, they come up with great ideas in the capstone, and they can be potential candidates for companies that we could incubate. So those are just a couple ways that I'm driving this exposure of startups into the corporate environment.
Yeah, and look, I'll that's great, Paul. I'll add on a little bit as well, right? So I'm going to do a little bit of compare and contrast. So I was the VP of product for the marketing cloud and the IoT cloud at Salesforce. And when I was at Salesforce, I had a fantastic working relationship with our venture group. Essentially, as they kind of had deals come in through kind of their front door, they would do an initial vetting of them, and then they would make connections, right? And the value of that to an entrepreneur was that there was a very logical kind of place for them to go. Even if kind of the venture group, for whatever reason, wasn't necessarily interested in an investment, they would vet the deal. And then if it looked like an interesting company that could be applicable to maybe what I was doing in the marketing cloud, they would pass it on to me. And the advantage to me was that, hey, it was already a vetted deal, by folks who are kind of in that business. And, there was already some sense that there was some strategic alignment there. And so it created a very logical front door. At Microsoft, we also have a venture group, but in a total of kind of 9 years working at Microsoft, I've never once gotten an introduction from anyone in our venture group to somebody else in terms of what they're doing. So that's a little more tricky, right? I think there is no logical front door at Microsoft. And the bad news about that is, as an entrepreneur, you don't know where to start. The good news is it's almost like we know it, and we try to almost make up for it by really kind of going out of our way if we come across somebody or somebody reaches out to us to try to at least get them to the right people. And my guidance on that front would be, again, I think, JP kind of kicked things off talking about kind of some work she was doing around coming out of robotics and some work with ethics and that type of stuff. And that's clearly a hot area in technology. It's an area that we care a lot about at Microsoft. It's also an area where we've got a lot of experts who are out there kind of speaking on it and speaking on that topic. And my best guidance, and I think kind of oftentimes the best way to get started, is to find those people who are out speaking on these topics and connect with them, right? Either by, attending one of their sessions, by even kind of attending one of their sessions and then reaching out on LinkedIn or whatever the case may be. I think your probability of making a meaningful connection is much higher if you actually really kind of find someone who's interested in your topic. And the best way to do that, I think, oftentimes is through what are we speaking about, and does it align with what I'm trying to do?
Matt, those are great pointers and guidance. I can say just with healthcare, where it's a very difficult industry to break into. You mentioned the ventures at Microsoft, and we work with Microsoft as well. Optum Ventures, we've become a channel for the companies that Optum Ventures not only invest in, but also even more important for us, for the Optum Startup Studio, we've become a funnel for the companies that they pass on, but are of interest, right? And then we'll provide interaction with the SMEs or the people that care about the technology or service that they're building, which gives them the greatest exposure. The talking events as well are really important because you're usually talking to somebody who's actually in the business who would use it, as opposed to, you know, a front door like a ventures group, which is just more really looking about their investment opportunities, not necessarily directing you into the company itself and the right group. So I would echo what Matt said there, that's a great way to break in.
Yeah, and I think that leads to just let's get aligned on semantics quickly, because I think we've tossed out a bunch of terms that like there's deeper meaning than we may all appreciate around this, right? So there's a venture investment, right? And I would agree with Matt's statement. I've unprompted by him been saying for the last year, to me, like CVC is the underutilized quiver in most corporate innovation initiatives today. I think Salesforce is a good exception to that rule. At Birchmere, I think we've done 4 deals with Salesforce Ventures over the last 5 years, and they've all been actually great experiences, which is both unique in terms of volume and that the non-corporate VC actually has something positive to say about the venture group. But there's ventures, right? There's incubators and accelerators. There's this new studio model that I think, you know, we're championing with Optum, but I think you're going to see a lot of companies do this as sort of the accelerators. There's customer interactions, and there's sort of research partnerships, which I think Matt touched on nicely from some of these research groups, right? So you've got a bunch of different buckets here. I don't think it's an either or thing, it's often an and thing. But how should entrepreneurs think about those different interaction points as maybe a getting started proposition with a company? And maybe Paul, why don't you start, and then others can jump in, because you've played with a lot of these in your innovation role at Optum.
Yeah. So, so as I mentioned, you know, the Optum Startup Studio, and what Sean was just saying, is a studio model. It's a corporate studio model, and I think, you know, I agree with Sean. There's more and more companies looking to do that because it fills a gap where it's not a venture capital investment, right? It's really a strategic interest in specific areas, right? So we align very closely with the lines of businesses in knowing what their needs are, and we're focused on being able to accelerate their transformation agenda. The healthcare is going through a major digital automation transformation, so we're very aligned to that line of business. We've had internal incubators where they're employees, and they have an idea, and then we built what we call the internal garage, and that was not as successful. You have a lot of people that had never been in a startup. They lived in the corporate world, and I'm not saying this is a bad thing, so don't misunderstand me, but there isn't the same sense of urgency. There is not the same really awareness of the marketplace, because they're really inside usually a large IT organization, in our case, our example. And so they were just missing some key characteristics of a startup, that there's some hunger there, there's identifying the need, and then there's experience in standing up MVPs quickly, as opposed to a more structured, governed process of building a point solution versus a product to get to market quickly. So hence the Optum Startup Studio came to be, and Sean and I partnered on that with CMU CSL, Corporate Startup Lab. And we're really in our second cohort, but our first real cohort, in that we have a really good group of companies, very, very varying backgrounds. Some are multiple serial entrepreneurs, and others are first time. But again, we very much align with the business in this case. And then Optum Ventures, we can also, it's a bidirectional, we can feed them afterwards. It can go to Optum Tech after they graduate from the cohort. We can incubate them internally, bring them into a pilot, mature the product. And then if it gets to a point where, and we use them as a vendor customer relationship and pay them as a service. And then they could graduate into an investment by Optum Ventures, and then continue to grow that company from a ventures perspective. Did I touch on the points, Sean?
Yeah, I think that's. I'm going to sort of pointed follow up to both Matt and Matt just to kind of help move this along, and then again I'll be monitoring the chat, folks, or if you want to raise your hand. But Matt Quigley from MSA, right? So you talked about NIST and how that's helped you guys. How do you think about, because I think this also gets to the right executives inside a company for entrepreneurs to be talking to. How do you think about the folks in your organization that you're pulling into some of those meetings and who are involved in those groups?
Yeah, absolutely. I think MSA's structure is a little bit unique, where we have recently established a technology strategy team for all of our business units. So within our fire service business, but also for our two industrial primary markets, both gas detection and industrial PPE. So typically when we're engaging with companies, we're approaching it both from a strategic fit. So I think Paul touched upon that really well in terms of when we're looking at a startup, it's really for a specific initiative or a specific product that we're trying to bring to market, that we're looking for outside expertise or a very unique competitive advantage that we think could really put the product over the edge. But we do approach it from both the business side and from the technical side. From experience, I would say that the majority of time it's our M&A committee and some business representative that we have from our team providing guidance on commercialization, how the product would be received in the marketplace, and more of the nuts and bolts in terms of bringing a product from the theoretical into the more practical. But I would say that lately we've been really establishing a strong relationship between our technology strategy team, the leadership on that team, to provide specific guidance on outfitting specific IP for our market. So MSA is a little bit unique, where the market that we serve is not so much niche, but it's definitely different than the consumer space. So while we are delving into software development, high-end electronics, the specific environmental needs of the fire service market in general, in terms of the environment for heat and flame protection, the robustness of the product, requires a certain level of expertise that MSA has really developed over decades of product development. And I would say that that's really been one of the major hurdles that we've seen startups really struggle with is, the electronics, the technology is great, but really adapting that for the specific market has been when some of these companies have fallen flat a little bit. So what we've been doing a little bit better is attacking this from both the business and from the technical side, and really establishing primary points of contact as advisors, as mentors, to help guide these startups along the journey.
That's great. Matt, so you sort of opened this up a little bit already with the Salesforce Ventures thing. One might suspect that Microsoft would also be in the Salesforce category. I don't think they are. You don't have to say that, but I don't think they are. I guess the question to you, though, is for entrepreneurs who maybe are trying to go through the front door of a ventures group, what are some tips you might give them to assess quickly, like who's a good VC group to partner with, and who maybe you want to start looking for plan Bs on that side door?
Yeah. Yeah, look, I think it's partially about what I would say is kind of just doing your homework, right? And honestly, I would say the same thing, whether you're going in through a venture group or whether you're trying to kind of find somebody who's, in a particular product group within a venture, whatever the case may be. I think it's just all about that grind of doing your homework. I think Paul hit on it, right? He talked about kind of, hey, we tried incubating some kind of internal stuff and kind of doing internal incubation and innovation, and just didn't have the right necessarily DNA of the people, right, who had been in our company. The great thing about entrepreneurs is they work, tirelessly and relentlessly. And so if you look at and just compare the portfolios and look at the deals that are being done by, say, a Salesforce Ventures versus a Microsoft Ventures, what you'll notice is Salesforce does a lot of deals. They get in at lots of different stages of investment. And if you compare that to Microsoft, what you'll see is, hey, Microsoft very rarely leads investments. A lot of times they'll put money in alongside of something, and I saw, kind of the last big investment we just did was in a company called Databricks, which is ready to go public, right? And so not necessarily particularly helpful if you're a 10-person kind of company, or a 5-person company, or even a 1-person company, right? Getting in the last round before an IPO, if that's where they're playing, probably not your cup of tea. What I would also say though is, I think there's a lot of value in not necessarily just coming through the front door. Even at Salesforce, I think there's a ton of value in finding those people in the product groups who, where the stuff they're working on aligns with what you're working on. And then honestly, doing a quick scan of their LinkedIn profile. Do they have something on their profile that kind of speaks to kind of some level of entrepreneurship, right? Again, whether it's they've done startups themselves, whether it's they're part of some initiative within the company that they're in, kind of that looks towards startups and other smaller companies to kind of help foster them. I think part of it is, again, even about the DNA of the people in these companies, and how can you find not just the person with the right technical expertise and alignment with what you're doing, but also with the right DNA on that side of the house to kind of say, hey, these are the type of people who have an affinity for working with startups.
Yeah, that's exactly right. LinkedIn is your friend on these things for sure, right? So let's talk about just like the whatever you do, don't do that kind of part of the topic, right? So you don't have to name companies or anything like that, but you guys have been on both sides of these tables. You've thought about like what are the things that are absolutely mistakes that you think a startup should avoid when pitching a large company? And Matt from MSSA, why don't we've got 2 Matts, so I just keep it. But Matt from MSSA, why don't you start, and then we'll kind of go down the line here.
Sure. So I think one of the things that we're typically stressing when we're, on our side of the table, when we're hearing pitches or we're trying to find a good fit for either a specific product in mind or a specific technology that we want to develop, is really to understand specifically what the competitive advantage of the idea or the IP is. I think somewhat of a mistake some startups do make is we spend a lot of time reviewing the financial opportunity, the specific estimates with regards to what level of revenue we can expect over a 5-year period, what the return would look like. And I'm not saying that's not important, but that's something that, MSA and the startup is going to get to together. It's something that we're going to have to work on in terms of sizing the opportunity, getting on the same playing field in terms of where we think this product can sell and what that opportunity is. What's much more important to us at MSA is really understanding how is this idea better or different than the 10 other companies that are also playing within the space, and then how protected that idea is. Is it IP protected? Is it something that's very difficult to reproduce? So it really helps us understand how this is differentiated from what our competitors are doing, as well as how long we would have this advantage within the space as well. So typically some of the best pitches that we hear or some of the best presentations that we sit through are really spent more around the specific idea or that IP that is going to put this product over the edge.
Hey, Sean, I'd love to add on to that if it's okay. I think that comment that Matt just made is great, right? I think this is the difference between if I'm going in and kind of pitching to a venture group, right? I'm going to go in and I'm going to pitch kind of obviously what's unique about our technology or our offering, but also what the business opportunity is. And quite frankly, when I'm at a company like Microsoft, I don't really care what your business opportunity is, with all due respect, right? I care about, I think, what Matt said, which is, hey, how is it that what you're building or what you're bringing to the table is unique and different than what we have internally within the walls of Microsoft? And, how can it kind of help further what we're doing? And I think sometimes the mistake that people make, kind of knowing that is, sometimes they try to go too far, I think, in trying to tell me how we at Microsoft should be using their technology versus just coming in and explaining what it is and give the pitch on why you got into this, why you're investing in it, why are you getting behind this, and what do you think is different? And then, just listen. And I can tell you different ways that we could potentially roll it in, because you just have no way from the outside of knowing what's really happening and what are the kind of hot topics or hot issues that we're facing internally. And it doesn't mean that you shouldn't kind of tee up some of that, but I oftentimes get these really kind of honed pitches around kind of, integrating their product with our products, and this is what the business could look like, and this is what we could do, and here's the joint venture plan we have. And I'm like, whoa, let's start way where Matt said, right? Let's understand what is it that you're bringing to the table, and then let's have a conversation around together, where might this apply across Microsoft?
Yeah, and Matt, if I can just add on to that, and I completely agree with what you just said. I think one thing that has sometimes been missed, and just to bring up this point, is that the group that you're pitching within a company may not be the only people that would be interested in that particular IP or technology. So we've had situations where a startup would come in and really articulate very well what the technology was, and basically, and as Matt said, tell the story of why this is important and why we need to be acting on this now. And while it may not fit within fire service or the particular product group that's sitting at the table, within MSA, or as Matt mentioned, within Microsoft, we know that another group is working on a similar type problem, and we can make the connections from there to help facilitate that development down where it needs to be. So I think, as Matt stated, it's really important from just that concise, that clear definition in terms of what sets this product apart, and then the company can then use that information to best fit where that would kind of reside within the company.
So I think that's great advice from Matt and Matt. I'm going to come from a different direction a little bit. What I would tell startups coming into a very large company is, first, make sure you really know who your audience, just to what Matt that just spoke, Matt, it said, if there are a lot of efforts in big companies. If you get approached by a technical team, I would caution you to make sure that they're just not trying to learn from you, and they're internally really your competition, and are trying to build what you may be offering the company. So just be aware of who you're talking to. You want to make sure you're talking to the business, or somebody who really is responsible for the business. The other thing is, if you engage a large company and you're asked to do a pilot or some sort of proof of concept, make sure you really define what success is, right? Because you can get really dragged down or consumed by a large company. And, I really speak from experience with the telco. So working with Verizon or AT&T, it can be literally a two-year runway with them, and they'll keep asking to do more and more and more. And as a small company, yeah, you want that 800-pound gorilla, but at the same time, you have a finite amount of resources, and you want to make sure that you're progressing in your business plan, so you're meeting your investors' expectations, or if you're looking to gain another round, you have to show market progress. So I just bring out those two things to be aware of, when you approach a large company.
That's awesome. So Matt Crespi, who most of you guys know, is the co-founder of the CSL with me. Matt got, unfortunately for me, fortunately for him, did finally get his PhD and graduate, which we were kind of hoping that could go forever, but it is what it is. But he graduated and got his PhD and is doing awesome stuff these days. But he's in the chat and had a he says sorry about that. I'll eventually forgive you, Matt. But he had a good question, which is, when it comes to finding creative ways to engage with startups or a startup ecosystem, what's the company you admire, and what are they doing to earn that admiration?
It's a tough one. It has to be a startup?
No, I think large companies engaging with startups or startup ecosystems. So like, what's a company you think who's engaging with startups or startup ecosystems? Well, I think the idea is basically any company not named MSA, Microsoft, or Optum is fair game here, and then why you admire them.
So, I have to, just from past experience, I work very closely with Verizon, and Verizon has a ventures group, and they are very, very focused on their business's requirements. And when they invest in a company, it's really, they become your shepherd, and they commit resources to that company to make sure that they are successful within Verizon. Verizon's a big company as well, right? So I thought that they always did a really great job. Now, I didn't go through that channel when I, as a startup, entered Verizon and was successful there, but I did end up getting to know that group, and I watch them as they work with companies coming in. So I thought they did a really, really good job, and they were very committed to that investment in that company.
Actually, you know what? I'll even extend that a little bit further. I actually have had similar experiences with both T-Mobile and Sprint as well. And then now even in my role at Microsoft, as you think about kind of augmented and virtual reality, there's a ton that we do in conjunction with those telcos with kind of various startups. I actually think they are one of the better industry sectors that are actually pretty good at kind of doing that. And I think to a large extent, it comes down to the simple fact that, you know, they make these huge investments in infrastructure, you know, a la 5G, and now they're all scrambling around trying to say, okay, what's going to be the killer app that makes 5G really valuable and makes everyone want to pay a whole bunch of money for it, right? And, you know, they've got kind of that mentality of saying, hey, we're only half of the solution, right? And we need to go out and find the others. So I think that whole space it's a great kind of call out, Paul. I think that whole space is ripe for those types of not just partnerships, right, but also that mentoring, shepherding you through, you know, those types of things. It's a good one.
Yeah, and sticking on the telecom theme, one firm that I've been very impressed with is Firstnet, who's releasing basically a telecom network specifically for first responders, so firefighters, EMS, and police, that operates on the AT&T network but provides priority to those first responders when they're using the telecom networks. So their support, they're heavily involved with the previous organization that I referenced, the NIST PSCR group, which is really an opportunity for academia, startups, and large corporations to come together to look for solutions for these specific markets. So beyond just providing funding for some of these startups, I feel like they take a very strong position with regards to being active within the community, providing guidance in terms of how their roadmap is intersecting with how startups could either get involved or leverage their technology. So completely agree with Paul and Matt with regards to that. You know, telecommunications space seems to really be strongly advocating and supporting startups.
Yeah, and just for the students, most of you guys and folks remember Mashari from last year, who was part of CSL. He's now a big part of, he's joined Verizon and on that team now doing the Verizon stuff. And I do think that it's a good point. Like when you make an investment like 5G, it's going to be a long payoff, and you certainly won't go end to end on that payoff. Maybe just push you guys for like one more creative example. If anybody's got one more company outside of yours that's doing some interesting things, just to spur the conversation. And then what I'd love to do is just take a couple minutes after that and have each of you share one or two either areas or startups specifically that you'd love to talk to, right? Because maybe there'll be an entrepreneur on here who's interested in that, or they may know a classmate or a faculty member or an advisor who may be interested in the stuff you're looking at. But first, one more example of a company doing creative things.
Look, I think one of the things I'll throw out, and this is not going to, I mean, I can use Salesforce as the example, which we've talked about, right? And we've talked about their venture group and kind of how the mentality of their venture group. But I actually think there's something else that kind of feeds into the DNA of that company. You know, the CEO himself, right? Mark Benioff invests in a ton of startups. He's got, you know, his own kind of, you know, posse of 30 or 40 different startups at any one point in time that he's putting his own money into. And then you also have, you know, Salesforce has worked hard to kind of move beyond just being a CRM application to trying to reposition themselves as much more of a platform that you can build applications on top of. And as they've done that, you know, and you know, kind of position themselves as a platform and built industry kind of sectors or kind of specialties within there. You know, you've got the health cloud, the financial services cloud, you know, those types of things. I think companies that have that combination of their platform companies, which means by default, they've got a dependency on other people to build apps to take them to market, and they have a strong industry focus, are the companies that tend to do this stuff better. Because again, you've got these industry experts that can relate to, you know, the business that you're building in their industry, and they're also dependent on other companies, similar to what we talked about with the telcos, to kind of actually fuel kind of their entire platform play that they're making, right? And so I would say, you know, less about a specific company, but those big platform companies with strong industry kind of plays within them are probably a great place to look.
Awesome. Okay, let's go around. And Matt from MSA, we'll start with you, and then Paul, and then Matt from Microsoft. Just one or two areas that you're interested in engaging with startups, either you yourself or the folks you work with in your organization.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the areas that we're looking specifically is to leverage our new cloud software platform. So two primary areas of focus that we'll be investing heavily in the short term and looking for partners to help us with will be cooperative location for firefighter location and connected worker location on active sites, as well as augmented reality and advanced user interfaces that we can integrate into our existing portfolio of fire helmets or breathing apparatus for firefighters. So we're looking in the space of leveraging our existing technology that we've either launched or are launching in the near term. But I would say that those are the two primary areas that we are specifically looking at to engage aggressively over the short and medium term.
Hey, Matt, there's this startup in Seattle called Microsoft. They might have something in the AR space for you. I heard they just did a CEO swap though, so who knows stability of the company, but it might be worth looking at. Paul, go ahead. What are you looking to talk to startups about?
So that's a very broad question for us. So we're in every part of the healthcare ecosystem, and the whole ecosystem needs to be upgraded, so to speak. So that being said, we're very focused on care delivery. We're making major investments in care delivery organizations and specialty surgical centers, et cetera. And what we want to do is apply as much as possible AI and the subsets of AI in that space. So, clinical decision support, automating that through intelligent assistance and voice processing, voice recognition, visual, machine learning. So all of those areas are great interest to us. Natural language processing, anything that can help automate, accelerate the decision support. When you come in with an illness, that we can provide tools to the specialist to better guide you in the next step, so that the outcomes are better and reduce the costs.
Good. And Matt?
Yeah, so as I said, right, I'm kind of very focused on kind of the augmented and virtual reality space right now, right, and kind of running our product strategy and roadmap. And I would say kind of two big categories of things that are kind of clearly on that roadmap at kind of various kind of points in time. One kind of now, here today, and one a little bit down the road, both of which are interesting. Are, the one that's a little bit down the road are, as you think about kind of, iPhones now, iPad Pro, shipping with kind of LiDAR cameras on them, right? You've got this ability to kind of capture spaces. And as you think about more and more augmented reality being out on those devices, you've got the ability to capture kind of people in their homes. You've got the ability to capture people, places and things, right? And anyone who's doing any kind of work around adding contextual or semantic layers or meaning to kind of those spaces and those places, or those people, places, and things, is something that's super interesting, right? As we think about kind of this longer term play of, how do you create kind of a digital twin of the world by stitching all of these kind of little maps of public and private spaces together, right? And so I think anything that's in that space, anything that has to do with, privacy and ethics in that space, super kind of interesting. The other one that I would say is if you also think about augmented virtual mixed reality, it's still a very nascent category. And so we've seen applications in healthcare, we've seen applications in manufacturing, but again, companies who are building applications to go after very specific kind of industries or very specific roles within industries, it's still a wide open kind of area. And I would say particularly as we think about having to move to this world of doing more and more of these kind of remote work types of environments, which is not going to go away even after COVID goes away. How can you leverage the power of augmented and virtual reality to do kind of next generation collaboration? It's easy for us to exchange ideas when we're talking kind of, in a verbal way through a medium like Zoom or Teams at Microsoft, but it's very hard to do like real work, right? If we wanted to do a whiteboard session, this medium just doesn't, lend itself to that. If we wanted to actually be working on a prototype of a robot or the next generation, kind of gas monitor at MSA, this medium is not great for that, right? And so how can you leverage kind of augmented virtual and mixed reality to kind of enable that next generation collaboration is another area that we're super interested in.
Cool. And then one last topic. I know we'll be respectful of your time, so we'll get you out of here in the next 10 minutes or so. But one last topic that I don't think we can have this panel and not address is the M&A piece of this, right? So certainly there are entrepreneurs who hope to sell their companies to companies like yours, right? And I guess what's your advice on maybe that, if that's the lens on what their interest is in partnering with the company? Should they start walk in the door, say we want to sell to you? Should they start with a customer partnership? What's the best way to get started, and what are the things they should keep in mind if M&A is ultimately their goal?
I'll just jump in here. So if we're thinking about M&A when we're looking at a company, I'll just share what we're thinking about, right? So, and Matt, and this has been brought up before a little bit too. So yeah, we want to know what's different about your product and how it differentiates what we're doing. We also, look at you from a valuation perspective as, well, what would it take for us to build that, right? So we compare our internal costs to what your valuation would be, right? Had we just acquire you and we had source code your talent. So I would think about that is if you're getting into the discussions of whether it's an investment or they're even an M&A as a whole, when you present yourself, think about the work you've done in terms of man hours, number of lines of code, because we actually look at that and we have a formula to use that generates a number that we would consider you, our corp dev as your evaluation. What we pay for that, we'd compare that with our internal costs. So I'd just be ready with that because that's come up a few times. And another hat I have is that just that M&A. I manage the M&A portfolio for Optum Tech, and a lot of times we look at these companies and we try to find a valuation different than what you just typically 5x or whatever in the market. We'll have a different view on that. It might be more favorable to you, quite honestly, our model and how we determine valuation than just a typical multiple for a tech company. So I'd just be prepared to answer that question because sometimes people put that on their spreadsheet, how much if they're a startup and self-funded, and they put how much they personally put in, and it seems to be a small number, but to them it's a large number. It doesn't help you, right? So I wouldn't share those numbers, quite frankly, because you're putting man hours in, right? In years, man years, and that's valuable. Does that make sense, Sean?
Yeah, so it does. So, but when should they mention they're interested in M&A from your perspective?
Well, that can happen pretty early. They do their pitch, and because one of the things we'll ask them is, where are you, right, in terms of your customer base and your plan, and that's when they should say, well, here we are, but we're actually looking for, either an investment or, we'd be interested in M&A. So they should say that up pretty soon, pretty early, I should say. That's my advice.
Yeah, I think, Matt, what's either of you guys jump in, I guess, what have you found in the companies? And I'll share my experiences as well doing this a few times, but Matt, anything to?
Look, I'll add, right? And I have, again, and maybe, Paul's making me rethink this a little bit, right? Because maybe I have a bias that I shouldn't have. If someone comes to me and solicits me with, hey, we're looking to sell, right? I open up their pitch deck every single time and I look at it, and I never, ever, ever return that message, right? Because I have this philosophy that, hey, if you're getting out of it, there's clearly something wrong with it, or you don't believe that, hey, this is kind of, has the potential to be big. And so I honestly don't typically waste my time on those types of things. I way prefer somebody coming to me and saying, hey, let's try, and I want to be careful. I want to separate out making an investment in them, right? Either, participating in a venture round as a strategic investor, doing even a joint venture, whatever the case may be. We had a startup that we loved recently, right? That kind of was adjacent to the space we play in and aligned with one of those two areas I mentioned earlier. And honestly, we couldn't internally at Microsoft work out a deal to take an equity and ownership stake in the company. And so we just gave them a couple $1 million because we wanted to support basically what they're doing without taking an equity stake, right? In exchange for kind of a right of first look if they ever want to go sell, right? And so, I think so I'm not talking about kind of investment, but on the acquisition side, right? If you're looking to get out of the business, why would I want to be looking to get in that business is kind of my mentality. So I would never lead probably with, hey, we're looking to be acquired and, let's talk, right? There may be a place for that. I know with me personally, it usually sends, all kinds of red flags.
So good point, Matt. So let me qualify. So remember, I sit in Optum Tech, and we're looking for not companies that add to the top and bottom line. We're looking at technology that can fill a gap in our existing, efforts. So, and we're looking for talent, right? We're looking for the people that have that knowledge of how to build it. Now, if I go on the other side of the house, the COO side of the house, I totally agree with you. So let me qualify that, depending on your audience, right? But if I'm on the business side, I would definitely play up my business. I wouldn't lead with the M&A because you're just spot on. Then I'd wonder, okay, these guys either found that there's a hole here or something, they've missed the mark. Now they're trying to get out, getting something back, whatever, pennies on the dollar kind of deal. But yeah, that's a good point. So let me qualify. Where I sit, it's about filling a gap. So we're not looking for their revenue opportunity, the business opportunity. We're looking to fill a need in our development plan.
And I think you also, just from seeing, Optum has a fairly proactive outreach around some of those gaps, right? So you guys have, I know because we've helped you build them, you have sort of screeners based on top of publicly available databases. I won't say which ones, but think hard and you can figure out which ones, where we're looking at, venture rounds that happened and lag between those and proactive, sort of slightly more strategic than acqui-hire, but sort of product gap fillers, which I think is different.
Exactly.
I think the point that Matt's making though is on the other side of the house, I would just say too, and this is sort of, those of you who've met with me one-on-one have probably heard me say this at some point, great companies are bought, not sold at the premium price, right? And I think that's actually true even in Optum Tech. I think about the IoT platform, Paul, that you and I collaborated on recently, that was a acquisition, that was not a sell, right? They had and so great companies in general, when you're talking about that sort of strategic fit, they're purchased, not sold. And so you want to sort of, I think in general, kind of bring them in, get them excited about it, and then ultimately sort of leave the door open for that as a transformative event for you. Because we all understand, and all four of us on this panel understand, selling to one of these companies can be life-changing for you. And so nobody's opposed to that as an option, but you also should think about the opportunity cost of selling to one of them versus continuing to build it. And I think positioning that well is important.
I think it's a great point. I mean, I think, again, I'll go back to my experiences at Salesforce. Every time Salesforce acquires a company, a lot of the press and a lot of the analysts repeatedly talk about how they paid too much for it, right? And then in a couple of years, it becomes very obvious in many of them, right, that actually, no, you know what, they actually ended up getting a very sweet deal when it's all said and done. And I think it's because of that notion of, hey, great companies, basically get purchased, not sold, right? And so when I was at Salesforce, we spent $2.5 billion to acquire an email marketing company called ExactTarget, right? And at the time, everyone was convinced we paid too much for it. And then within 2 or 3 years, right, we were, generating annual revenue that was in line with what we paid for it, right? So I think it's a good point.
Yeah, I think Salesforce and Facebook, for what it's worth, I think both have played that game particularly well in the last, 10 years, for what it's worth. Cool. I guess any last kind of parting thoughts? So we've got 2 minutes here. So just real quick around any last parting thoughts, and then maybe also if you could, in addition to parting thoughts, also just share if people want to get in contact with you, if you're open to that, the best way to do that is LinkedIn or whatever the best way to connect with you is out there. Why don't we start with you, Matt, from MSA?
No, I think you guys touched upon a lot of good points. The only thing I would add, just from the M&A standpoint, is my experience at MSA has typically been when we engage with a startup on a very specific project, and the discussion of acquisition is usually brought up after we've gotten through a first project, or we've gotten our feet wet with starting the development standpoint. And one of the things that's, and I think you guys appropriately identified by saying great companies are purchased, they're not sold. And one of the things that's purchased is really that talent and that synergy within the organization. So one thing that is evaluated, from the MSA side, I'm sure elsewhere as well, is really understanding where the acquired company would fit within the overall organization, and how that team's culture will overall benefit and be a positive addition as well. So that's just another thing to consider when you're in the discussion table with a firm regarding an acquisition. Regarding in terms of getting in touch with me, LinkedIn is probably the best place, and I'm totally open to anybody reaching out.
Awesome, thanks. Paul?
Yeah, so LinkedIn as well is the best place to reach out to me. Paul Nielsen, you'll find me out there. That's definitely the place to get me, and I'm happy to try to answer any questions. And then to close out the M&A part, if I was on the other side and in the startup, I would play the game as long as I can to drive as much value as possible of the company. So just to Matt, Microsoft Matt, you do want to drive valuation, and treat yourself like you're a rare commodity when it comes to positioning yourself for an M&A.
All right, and Matt Fleckenstein.
Yeah, so I put my contact information in kind of the chat window. I would say the last, kind of just piece of guidance I would give you, right, is, I would encourage you to narrow the focus down to, hey, who are the 3 or 4 or 5 large companies that you actually would want to partner with? And then really kind of put your time into kind of understanding, hey, what could those partnerships look like? And like I said, try to find a champion, right? Try to find somebody with an entrepreneurial background, who, even if you don't they're not the perfect person or the person who ultimately is going to do something with you, they've got a soft spot for having been in your shoes before, and will help you find the right place, right? And so to a large extent, my guidance is, be an entrepreneur, be relentless, but not obnoxious, and figure out the right companies. Don't spray and pray. Find the right couple of companies that you want to go after and partner with.
Awesome. All right. Hey guys, thanks for doing this. I really appreciate it.